Good morning, Rotary International District 7770. My name is Donald Hovis with the Chicora Rotary Club here in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, and welcome to Conversations with Rotary Action People for Monday, July 6th. It's hard to believe it's already the 6th of July. July was just, felt like it was just yesterday. Hope everyone had a wonderful July 4th holiday weekend. Today is all about disaster preparedness. And joining us is Mr. Robert Burress. Good morning, Robert. Robert, come off mute for me.
Yep. Are you all here this morning?
We are. Thank you for being here, sir.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
I'm going to start with the vision statement of Rotary.
All right.
Together, we see a world where people unite and take action to create lasting change across the globe, in our communities, and in ourselves. For those of you on the Zoom call, please go to the chat box and introduce yourself. We are no longer doing the introductions on this program, so please post in the chat box your name and your Rotary Club. Those of you on Facebook, thank you for being here as well. How about go to the comment section right below the stream and put your where you're watching from and your Rotary Club. Miriam, thanks for posting in the chat, but tell us your Rotary Club so people know who you are. Robert, thanks for joining us today. I know you're going to talk about a lot of, things that will help people, be prepared and keep prepared for the upcoming disaster season. And hopefully we don't have any that come here to South Carolina. But in the event of a disaster, where do people go for information?
The best place for information outside of your local area is, if you have access to the internet, is going to scemd.org. That's the South Carolina Emergency Management Division's official webpage. It's the host of all information related to disasters, specifically response throughout the state. And if you don't have access to it in your mobile, you can, both either Android or Apple apps, there's a South Carolina Emergency Managers app that's downloadable for free that has a host of information on it, as well as planning tools to assist you with planning before disasters and information during disasters while it's active.
And so, Robert, want to give you a little insight on our Rotary District, just so you know. Everyone here is from the state of South Carolina. Our Rotary District starts in Columbia, goes down to Hilton Head and up the coast. So we have 79 clubs and about 3,500 Rotarians in our district. So for those of us in South Carolina, I think probably know the answer to this next question. However, I'm going to ask it to you. What is the most common threat for folks in South Carolina in terms of disasters?
Well, the most common threat to our state, for those of you who've lived here for more than a year, is obviously it's hurricane season, which we entered into in 1 June. Our most deadly threat is earthquakes, but the likelihood of those occurring and doing destruction to South Carolina is extremely low. But as all of you all know from being in South Carolina for more than a year, is we are very, very active when it comes to hurricane season. And we've had one for almost the last 5 years ongoing. And this year, the predictions are higher than normal for hurricanes based on the weather pattern predictions out of the National Oceanographic Institute and the Colorado State models that they plan on a yearly basis. And as we all know, all it takes is one affecting our state to leave a lasting destruction and upset and displace people's lives for a long time to come. So earthquakes is the most deadly, but the most likely is hurricanes. And as you've seen so far this year, even before hurricane season officially started, there are already a few small weather incidents across the coast, including Tropical Storm Cristobal that hit going through Louisiana up through West Tennessee. So, and right now we're watching some small depressions that are not likely to directly affect our state and turn into either a tropical storm or a hurricane, but it will still impact especially people along the coast over the next week.
Yeah, I'm in Myrtle Beach, so they're calling for 70 to 80% chance of rain for the next couple days, I think, based on that. And I also heard this morning that Eduardo is already out there, and this is the 5th named storm, and it's the fastest we've ever been in terms of date for the 5th named storm in a season. So a lot of season left to come, though. So how would one prepare a plan for disasters?
Well, one of our favorite websites to use is through FEMA, and it's called the ready.gov website. And utilizing it as well as what you know about yourself and your situation, it'll help you plan what you need to do and where you need to go for almost every type of disaster. Obviously, with hurricanes being our biggest threat, is making an evacuation plan, either going through SCMD's website to see the evacuation routes and where the nearest places that are least likely to be affected, or using the ready.gov site and developing your own internal disaster plan for yourself and your family. This way you'll know ahead of time what kind of things you need to put together, like legal documents, medicines, hygiene items, and things like that, and know ahead of time where you're planning to go to get out of harm's way.
And I'll say, for those of you watching here on Zoom, if you have a question for Robert, I want you to post it in the chat box. And if you're on Facebook, I want you to post that in the comment below the stream. Now, Robert, when we talked prior to the call today, I think this last question I wanted to save for last, because obviously I think it's probably the most needed in terms of right now. But how has COVID affecting the disasters?
Yeah, COVID being a health pandemic disaster in itself has made us have to go back and rethink all of our plans when it comes to hurricane preparedness. Is decisions by local and state officials to evacuate are going to have to be made at an earlier time when the actual path and the effects are not going to be as well known to how much it'll impact South Carolina. And because of that, we have to make those decisions because of how complex things have to be for safety and safe distancing and social distancing, and ensuring everyone's safety during that event is going to have to be made well before we actually know the full effects on how much it's going to directly impact our state. Now, as you all know, the evacuation timeline is always built to backward plan based on the earliest likely arrival of tropical force winds to the coast of our state. And that is usually done when you can see the cone of uncertainty, which you can see from looking at various graphics on national weather sites. It's a big swath to show you how the odds are of where it's going to make landfall. And 90% of the time, somewhere within that cone is where the center of the hurricane is going to actually come through. But as you know, based on the sizes of hurricanes, it can still reach several miles outside of that cone of uncertainty. And we're going to have to make decisions to evacuate even when we're only at about a 50% knowledge base on where it's going to make it, if it's going to actually impact the state. Because of that, it's going to make things a lot more difficult, where we have to do lane reversals to help speed up the flow of traffic away from the coast, specifically related to our job when it comes to sheltering. And that's what our focus is we will have to limit the amount of spaces in shelters. Now, that doesn't mean there will not be enough shelters, but that means we'll have to open up a lot more shelters to ensure safe social distancing and make sure that people are screened prior to being able to get into those shelters. Because we know everyone's concern with COVID going on is going into places where you congregate increases the likelihood of you contracting it. But all the stuff we've gone through and all the planning we've done, as well as lessons learned from our sister states and our counterparts like Louisiana, when Tropical Storm Cristobal went through there, as well up in Michigan with the dams breaking up there. We've taken lessons learned from them when they've done sheltering to ensure that everyone has the absolute safest environment possible, not only for clients that have to stay with us, but our staff that would have to serve them as well. So the biggest thing is planning well ahead of time for hurricane season this year. For when it comes to hurricanes, because of COVID, is you've got to put a lot more stuff into effect. Do you have your own hygiene stuff? Do you have masks with you? Which is what we request, and we were bring some for our staff and the clients in shelters. But bringing your own is always a good safety backup, because you never know when things are going to run out whenever you go anywhere.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. Let's hope this year, 2020, has already been a weird year. Let's hope it's not a weird year from a disaster standpoint. So now I'm going to go, Robert, to the questions from the viewers, and we got several getting ready to come your way. So I'm going to start off with the first one, and the one we just went through that created those pretty sunrises and sunsets was that African kind of sandstorm. Has that affected hurricane season at all?
From how it's looked from the weather patterns, it's helped cause more of a dry air, and as we know, when the air is thicker and there's a lot more humidity in it, that makes it more conducive to hurricane type weather patterns. So based on how things were going early on prior to the season beginning, when it came to a lot of the storms coming up, it looks like we might have reached hopefully a lull by it pulling all the moisture out of the air to give us a lot longer time frame before we have the next possible storm that could possibly severely affect our state.
Let's hope that is definitely the case. So how is it that we are part of earthquake preparedness, and how many earthquakes has the state of South Carolina seen over the years? Do you have any of those statistics?
Yes, I have some of those. South Carolina averages about 10 to 20 small earthquakes a year, and we've had some fairly regular active ones in the Columbia area over the last couple of years, but most of those are so small you won't even feel, because we don't have any direct fault lines that run through the state, but we have a different type of tectonic action along our coast. The last major one we had hit South Carolina was in 1886, which pretty much devastated the city and county of Charleston. There was a 7.3 magnitude on the Richter scale, and that's the basis on what we look at for our survival planning for South Carolina. Now, as you know, if an earthquake does hit along the coastline, it could almost essentially turn the coast from Horry down to Charleston into its own island, because along those areas, they would do what's called liquefaction, turning the roadways and the ground into very, very loose soil, making it unsafe to travel. So we've worked with hurricane planners across our state, as well as more heavily hit areas such as California, to help develop plans to ensure that we could have the right support for people if it does occur in the state. Now, that's something that could happen, but we normally don't have to look at that as much, because we have to plan when it comes to sheltering to have backup plans, because as you know, most of our sheltering is done in schools, which are buildings. So we'd have to be working closely with FEMA and a lot of our volunteer organizations to set up field tents and things like that until we could have engineers test and ensure the structural integrity of buildings, so we could bring people back inside and shelter them safely indoors.
So one thing I want you to confirm for us is the emergency preparedness app you talked about earlier. Is that called CWRAP 211?
No, that one, let me pull it up. I'll look onto Apple's website real quick. If you put in a search bar for Apple and put in SC Emergency Manager, it will come up. It says SC Emergency Manager. It's got a blue logo with a red triangle and the palmetto in the center of it.
Gotcha. Thank you for confirming that.
My pleasure.
Another comment is Somerville. There's several people on this call from that area. Is built on a fault line, and the person is saying they've felt several earthquakes over the years.
Yes. And dreadfully, I don't have the exact statistics on how many specifically in Somerville have hit, but I would have to pull those up.
Yeah, no worries.
And yeah. Let me see. Yeah, Somerville. Last one I can see was a 2.4 that went through there, which is a relatively low one. I'm sure they felt it, but the structural integrity of most things should be fine. Like I said, our specialty is when it comes to mass care and sheltering, feeding, and distribution of goods, and we're not seismologists, but we work closely with NOAA and all the seismologists and the national organizations to ensure that all information is shared through the SC Emergency Manager app or through the website on if anything does occur, so people can see where they are in relation to those fault lines and the epicenter for an earthquake that occurs.
And would you do me a favor, Robert, and explain SCDSS mission with South Carolina Emergency Management, and what does that mean to us as Rotarians?
Yes, SCDSS stands for South Carolina Department of Social Services. That's who my actual employer is. I'm the Director of Disaster Services for them. And through them, I'm also dual-hatted under the FEMA's national guidelines for what's called an ESF. It's an essential support function for disasters, and I am the mass care lead for the state. And our mission and our vision is to provide first-class mass care services, emergency assistance, and support to all citizens in South Carolina and neighboring states, and those citizens that we do support that are living abroad in times of repatriation of a disaster that occurs overseas where U.S. citizens are involved.
So the next question is regarding the Lake Murray Dam. Was that reinforced years ago because of a threat of an earthquake?
Yes, and we're not part of the Army Corps of Engineers, which would be most likely the entity that worked on that. Every few years, each state that has a large number of dams does studies and modeling based on the history of the area. And as you've known, that went through Hurricane Florence, Matthew, and Hugo. It's not as much the winds that affect our state it's the amount of rain that it drops in a very quick amount of time. And a lot of our rivers and tributaries that come into the state, even if we do not take a direct impact across South Carolina, if a hurricane hits just north of us in North Carolina, all that water is going to flow down into our systems as well. So I don't have the information from the Army Corps of Engineers on what exactly they did to the Lake Murray Dam, but I'm sure it was based on modeling to further enhance and improve the capabilities of that dam to avoid any sort of a breach or sort of any inundation to cause an overflow.
Is that dam earthquake proof?
In the end, no dam is fully earthquake proof, but due to the fault lines not being close to it, the odds of it being directly affected, it would be an earthquake for all time, like the last one that hit in 1886 for that one to be affected. Now, anytime that we do have an earthquake throughout the state, the Army Corps of Engineers and other seismologists do go and visit every dam that there is in the state and check for structural integrity and report back. And in the 3 years that I've been working in the state, we have not heard of any that have been affected through any of the smaller earthquakes, and they didn't have any concerns that I've been tracking.
So if you want to stay in place during a hurricane per se, are storm shutters effective? And if they are, do you by chance know the best type to have?
Dreadfully, I do not. Those standards are run through the American Insurance Institute. They have testing centers, and it all depends on where you live in relation to the velocity of the winds that come in. Now, storm shutters, since I live here in the middle of the state, I don't deal with those nearly as much, but we have a common thought here is you run from wind and you run from water. So if you feel that the tropical force winds, when you look at the modeling as a storm is approaching, is going to hit high velocities of 100 plus miles an hour wherever you are, just having storm shelter isn't enough. So unless your house has been rated through your insurance company, I still wouldn't risk it. It's never worth your life to stay in place no matter what. If you have a chance to get out, then that's always the best option to do so. You can always replace things afterward, but you can't replace a life.
Couldn't agree with you more. If a storm, and you may actually, this next question, you may have said the answer to this when you were talking about COVID and how it's affecting disasters, but I'm going to ask it again just to make sure, because we've had a couple new people join here. So if a storm comes and people have to evacuate, what does shelters do if a person shows up with COVID symptoms? Are they accepted, isolated, or rejected?
If a person shows up with COVID symptoms, we immediately put them into an isolation/observation area, and we work with our Department of Health and Environmental Control to put them in a location nearby that will guarantee that the odds of them transmitting to anybody else is extremely lowered. Every person, staff, and client that shows up at one of our shelters is screened upon entrance, and they ask a bunch of questions related to possibilities of exposure. So anybody that could show symptoms or answering the questions that there's a chance of them being exposed, we will put them in a observation/isolation area to ensure their safety as well as our staff, and they'll be working with medical personnel to make sure they're safe during their stay with us.
How can our Rotary District help in times of a disaster?
Well, the biggest thing is reaching out through either our team or our volunteer organizations like Red Cross, Salvation Army, Harvest Hope, or Southern Baptist Disaster Relief, and either volunteering your time or volunteering any sort of goods and services you have. That would greatly assist their missions in supporting us and supporting the citizens of the state. And anytime you all need, you can reach out to any one of our members of our team or through SCMD's website to volunteer service or goods, and we can connect you with all of our partners to where it'll be most needed.
And those of us Rotarians on the line, if you notice the chat box, there's some comments going on about Shelter Box. Now, if you haven't watched our previous CWRAP segment talking about Shelter Box, I encourage you to. Herman Dixon did a great job, and that would be an outstanding resource to have available during times of disaster. So there also is a comment there from Mary Louise as well. So thank you for that. And yeah, that would be a great resource. I think the last one I have for you, Robert, is not sure if you have the statistics. In terms of the state of South Carolina, do you know the biggest earthquake, most magnitude for the state of South Carolina, and possibly maybe do you know about the United States?
For the United States overall, no. But for South Carolina, the biggest one was the one that hit in Charleston back in 1886, and it was a 7.3 on the scale.
Wow.
So we average 1 to 2.5 for the 10 to 20 of them that occur in the state each year, but there hadn't been one that large since 1886. So obviously that would be a devastating effect based on the lines that would draw across the coast all the way up to North Carolina, putting Horry County, Myrtle Beach, Charleston, all those places a lot harder to reach by land. It would take a lot of air support to get people in and out, and probably possibly even some sea support before all the engineers could check all the bridges and the directions to make sure we could reach them on by land and provide ground support. So wow. It's been quite a while since we've had one that large, and we're just hoping that we don't have one that high again. Now, one of my partners just shared The biggest one recorded in U.S. history was in Alaska in 1964, and that was a 9.2.
Wow.
So you can see we've been up there pretty high as well.
And I'm
But
seeing
not in our
now
lifetimes.
and I'm also seeing that top 4 all in the United States were all in the state of Alaska.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting to know. I did not know that. Well, Robert, thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate your time.
Oh, my pleasure.
Lots of important information you just shared. Those of you watching, if you want to watch this again, this will get posted to our YouTube channel, and then we're also streaming it on our Facebook page. So we encourage you to go there and share it on your personal pages and your Rotary Club pages. For those people that weren't able to join us today, maybe they can watch this at a later time. Thank you again, Robert.
I appreciate it.
Our next meeting will be brought to you by your CWRAP team. Will be on Wednesday be the second all club call on Wednesday. Note the start time for that of noon, 12 noon on Wednesday. And then we'll do another Conversations with Rotary Action People coming up on Friday. I will tell you, we've got a great schedule planned for the month of July. So you want to reach out. Those of you people that are not on this call that are there in Rotary with you, reach out to them and say, hey, you should really join us on Wednesday or Friday this week. We're going to have a great speaker. So hopefully you'll do that. To close us down today, I will do the Rotary 4-way test. Of the things we think, say, or do, is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned? One final announcement as we close. Those of you on the Zoom call, going forward, when you log into Zoom, we would love for you to put your first and your last name. You entered into a waiting room, and if we don't know your last name, you may not get access. So please put your first name and your last name in Zoom, and that's easy to do from your phone or your computer right before you hit join. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to one of us, and we'll help walk you through that process. That's a wrap for Conversations with Rotary Action People for Monday, July 6th. Have a great day, everyone. See you on Wednesday at noon. Take care.
Thanks, Robert.
And guys,